I'd like to welcome everyone this morning to class. Appreciate everybody being here. We know, as always, I know everybody enjoys the fellowship and the camaraderie in between worship and class, and that's extremely important in building relationships with each other. Hope everybody is doing well. It's like another beautiful day outside. Another opportunity of just being able to enjoy the beauty of nature that God has provided, the changing of the leaves, the colors, the changing of the times of the year. All of those things remind us of really the majesty and the wonder of God. And we can always be grateful for what He does and how He reminds us really each day of how He is involved in our lives. You need to remember to get the clicker. I think Les said he's warming up his coffee, so he should be here momentarily. I do believe there was still coffee left today, so. We're going to be continuing on with our thoughts on walking on the water with Peter, or with Jesus, lessons from the life of Simon Peter. Just a little bit of a reminder of kind of where we finished last week before we head into the lesson for this week. Because we start looking at the discussion here, Peter and Jesus' prediction of the destruction of the temple. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. And Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." We talked about this last week as far as kind of what that meant and how it was really pointing to something beyond the fig tree itself. Jesus went on to say, "Have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go, throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them." And so it's always important, I think, for us to remember that what is asked in accordance with God's will, not to fulfill our own desires. Sometimes that's where people get a little bit caught up on things. They start asking for things and they say, why am I not getting this? Why am I not receiving this? Well, sometimes people are asking for wrong motives, with wrong motives. And I think even at times they may not even realize they're asking with a wrong motive. But we have to always keep in mind what Jesus' will is, what God's will is for each of us. I would say that almost all of us can recall times in our lives. Was the coffee way back there today? Was it?
Yeah, they ran out over here.
Oh, you had to find some somewhere else.
So I had to go back to the Discovery Hendersonville place.
Oh, okay. Well, you knew they'd have some there. So.
Yes, they did. Keep going.
Okay. So, just the importance of remembering and recognizing. At least I know in my life, I'm sure less in yours as well, that I can look back and think on things that I had, even prayed about, had asked for. I didn't receive what I was asking for. And quite often, what I end up receiving is something far better than what I asked. And it's when you look back, in hindsight, well, I'm sure glad God didn't answer that prayer the way I was asking it. Instead, He answers it in a much better way, not just for me, but for those around me.
Yeah, it's an old country song, "Thank God for Unanswered Prayers."
Yeah.
Which is not unanswered, it's just not in the way you thought you wanted, because you're exactly right on that. And so, We're going to move now, though, to a fascinating question that is raised by the apostles. This is the inner circle. What you have here is an artist's rendition of the temple from the Mount of Olives. Looks very much like this. Jerusalem is a very rugged city. It's got huge ravines. This is the Kidron Valley right here. And the temple faced east, and the Mount of Olives was the mountain range on the eastern side. And so you had to go up the Mount of Olives to go toward Jericho. That's the direction you went. And the Kidron Valley ran down, and then it runs into the Valley of Hinnom. Valley of Hinnom. You may have heard the word Gehenna. Gehenna means Valley of Hinnom. It's the valley that is translated usually in our Bible as hell. Yeah. But it's just a bad valley where the dead were thrown over during the Babylonian war against the city of Jerusalem. Before they finally took the city and they burned Solomon's temple, they would throw the dead bodies, all the people who were dying of starvation, they would throw them over in that valley. And it was also a very wicked valley. It's where Solomon built several of his temples to the gods of his wives. And so this is Mark 13. And as Jesus was leaving the temple, this is probably, I'm guessing, Lee, probably the next to the last day. This is before he's going to eat Passover with the disciples. Some people date that, put that on Wednesday. Some people put it on Thursday. I'm a Thursday crucify person. I don't know if you hold to the Friday crucifixion day. I'm a Thursday one.
I think for me, it makes more sense.
It makes more sense because if Jesus is crucified on Friday and he's raised on Sunday morning, how many nights is he in the grave? You know, Friday night and Saturday night. It's only in the grave 2 nights. Jesus said, just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, so would the Son of Man be in the belly of the earth. And so I opt for a Thursday crucifixion date, and so this would probably be on Tuesday as they're leaving. But they're leaving, and they said, look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. If you ever get a chance to go to Jerusalem, which we may never, with this war going on, I had June convince Lee of going with me this time. And now June looks at me and says, nope, I am not heading over there. Those people are crazy. And but if you ever go over there, the foundations of the temple are still there that Herod had built. And how they carved stones that massive and moved them without modern machinery, I don't have a clue. Yeah. These things weigh tons. And so the apostles come out and they said, look at these buildings. This is incredible. And then Jesus shocks the daylights out of them. Not one stone here will be left on the other. Everyone will be thrown down. Lee, why is that such a shock to them?
Yeah, well, again, they're still looking for an earthly kingdom. And I'm sure, I'm confident in my mind that the temple was going to be a part of that.
Yes.
This was going to be headquarters. And they're looking and they're saying, this is magnificent. Look at, pretty soon, in a way, it's almost like pretty soon this is going to be ours.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when they're making these statements, and when Jesus says that, I mean, that just has to dumbfound them. It's like, what is going on? They're still not understanding, and still going to be some time before they understand that the kingdom is not a kingdom that's made out of made out of stones. It's in the heart. But right now, they're still concentrating on physical things. Jesus is eventually going to lead them into the spiritual things.
What Jesus is fixing to talk about, and watch what happens. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, they've left the temple. They were spending the night over in Bethany, so they had to go up the Mount of Olives. They've stopped at the top of the Mount of Olives on the way to Bethany, where they're spending the night. Peter, James, John, and Andrew. Not the inner 3, but kind of the inner 4. They come to Jesus privately. Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign that they're about to be fulfilled? And so here they are. There's the temple. The temple was magnificent. White marble, white granite, gold. I mean, the temple was covered in gold in the front. When the sun in the morning would come up, if you were on the Mount of Olives, it would blind you. It was that bright. It would reflect off the building. And so here they are looking across the Kidron Valley at the temple, and they said, okay, when and what's going to be the signs? Now, we don't have time to go into all of this. I wish we did, Lee. I'm convinced what Jesus predicted has been overlooked by almost all churches in the 20th century. Most people know that Jerusalem was destroyed. Most people don't ask the question, why? Why was the temple destroyed? Why did all of this happen? And in fact, a lot of the conflict going on in Israel today could be, I think, understood differently if people understood this better. But today's not the time to lecture on this, but let me just mention, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen. But the end. That is the key word. End. The end. Certain words have meanings. Let me ask you a question. Lee, what's a Q-tip?
A Q-tip?
Yeah, what's a Q-tip?
You know, clean out your ears with it.
A thing to clean out your ears.
Yep.
Now, does it make any difference what brand you get?
No.
They're all
still Q-tips.
They're all Q-tips,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, when in Scotland, you don't buy a vacuum cleaner. You buy a Hoover.
A Hoover.
It doesn't matter the brand that you're buying. Every vacuum's a Hoover.
Okay.
So it's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah. In the South, people from the North usually have a hard time figuring this out. You come down to the South, and someone has you over to the house, and they said, would you like to have a Coke? And they go, sure. And then they say, Pepsi, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, and they go, I thought you said a Coke. Because down here, that's a Coke. A Coke
Yep.
is any soft drink. Would you like to have a Coke? My kids, unfortunately my grandkids, are being indoctrinated wrongly. I go up north and they're like, would you like to have a soda? I don't know what a soda is. I go, no, but I would like to have a Coke. I mean, culturally, you see what's going on. The end here is an important phrase because of where it's found. I want to take you back 500 years. Daniel 9, verse 26. Okay? This is the prophecy about Jesus' death, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the destruction of the temple. Look at what Daniel says. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death. The anointed one, Christos, or Messiah, and will have nothing. The people of the ruler, put more bluntly, Luke would say, the armies of Rome, will come, destroy the city and the temple and the sanctuary. And then look at what it says. The end will come like a flood. War will continue, wars and rumors of wars, until the end. Okay? The desolations that have been decreed. The gospel writers will call these the abomination that causes desolation. In the first century, Daniel was one of the most popular books there was because everybody knew it was coming true. This is happening right now. They could read the four kingdoms. And so they knew what the end was. But Lee, they thought the same thing you thought. The only way the end would come is at the end of the world.
Right.
The temple would last until the world came to an end. And that wasn't the case at all. I I want to show you something else that Peter said. 1 Peter 4:9. This confuses a lot of people. The end of all things is near. Now, what's Peter saying? Now, Peter was saying the end of the world is near. He got it off by about 2,000 years
So far.
so far, and still counting. Peter knew the end was coming in that generation. Jesus says, this generation will not pass until all these things happen. But like you said a minute ago, in their mind, the temple ending had to mean the end of the world. But in Jesus' mind, no. It's the end of the Mosaic age. It's the end of the temple, the sacrificial system, the priesthood. Everything that had been Jewish is now coming to an end. No more priesthood. No more sacrifice. No more just fill in the blanks. Jesus is fulfilling all of it. Yeah. And so here's Peter, and Peter, I think Peter's still thinking it has to mean the end of the world. But it didn't at all. And by the way, Peter very likely was killed before witnessing this. John witnessed it. Peter did not, because it happened about exactly 40 years to the date Jesus predicted it. It happened. And all of Jerusalem was wiped out. I mean, wiped out. Jerusalem was no longer on the map. It was gone. I mean, the Romans cleared it so clear that nobody would even know a city was there. Yeah. And then about 100, not quite 100, 70 years later, the Romans decided to build a Roman city there, which created another problem. Most of us don't realize a city was rebuilt on Jerusalem called Capitolina. Capitolina was the name of the city until Constantine came along. And when Constantine came along, he converted. His mother was a Christian. He declared Christianity legal, then made it the religion of the Roman Empire, changed the name of Capitolina back to Jerusalem. That's 300 years later. Okay? That's a long time for Capitolina to be there. And so just a little background on what Jesus is talking about. All right. Now we're going to walk through what happens the next day. So if you don't mind, lead us through this.
So on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" They're like all good Jewish people. I mean, they're getting ready, but so far they don't know where we're supposed to go.
Where's
this happening?
And then the question of who's going to prepare it. Luke fills this in. Matthew doesn't. Yeah. But and by the way, we're fixing to move into the last night, which is going to be Peter and the foot washing and everything that goes on. If you would, take us through Luke's account.
Yeah. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go make preparations for us to eat the Passover."
So Peter and John becomes
they're the ones in charge of that part.
And Peter and John, Lee, are going to become partners in a lot of ways. The morning of the resurrection, when Mary Magdalene came and said, "The tomb's empty and we don't know where they've taken the body." What two disciples take off? We'll look at that here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Peter and John head off, and
who's the fastest?
Peter's faster. No, John's faster. John's faster. Peter's the one who, once he gets there, John stays on the outside.
That's right. John's
in.
afraid to go. He's evidently a little skittish going inside graves.
Yeah. And then Peter goes on in and observes. He's like, "Okay, what's happened?" Yeah. I see the body isn't here, but I see the remnants of things here. But,
yeah.
And whether things were starting to click, perhaps they were. And if they were, I kind of wonder if Peter's starting to have trepidation about it too, based off what we'll also be looking at here in a little bit with his denials that take place.
Absolutely. So Peter and John go and they make preparations. They got to go get the lamb. They got to sacrifice the lamb. They've got to get the bitter herbs. They've got to get the wine. They set up the room. All of this has got to be done, okay? And whether Peter and John did all of it or had some help, but they're the leaders.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have got to get it all organized.
And they've been partners all their adult lives.
Yes, yeah, in the fishing business. And you know, Lee, I love to think about Peter and John coming in, and they're like, okay, we need water to wash feet. Okay, put the water over there, put the basin, put the towel. And yet, nothing has crossed their mind, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
You know, all that's crossing their mind is somebody's
going to do it. We're just, we're being nice enough to
we're
get the
setting
stuff
it up.
ready for
Yeah,
them.
we're getting everything ready. And so now it's time for the evening meal. No one's feet have been washed. Lee, did you have to, when you were a kid, you come home from church, did you have to wash your hands before lunch?
If my mom caught me, I did. Yeah.
You know, whenever apologies to y'all, this is not meant to be ugly at all, but June will oftentimes say to me, have you washed the brethren off? In other words, I've shaken so many people's hands, I need to wash my hands before I have lunch. So have you washed the brethren off? That's just a common phrase in our family. And when I was a kid, I would come in from playing, and Mother would say, go wash your feet. Because we always went barefoot during the summer. How many of y'all went barefoot during the summer? Okay, a lot of you did. You know, from time school got out, the only time I wore shoes was Wednesday night to go to church and Sunday morning. The rest of the time I was barefooted. And by the way, do y'all remember how tough our feet got? We could run on glass, for heaven's sakes. I mean, our feet were tough. And so, and by the way, we ran outside. It didn't really smell bad. In biblical times, though, the streets were also, in some cases, the sewers.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not a pleasant place.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
So
you're walking through anything and everything.
Anything and everything. And so they're fixing to eat the Passover meal, and no one's agreed to wash anyone's feet. So what happens? Take us through it.
Yeah. Evening meal was in progress. The devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that he had come from God and was returning to God. Which, stopping for a second, he's got all the power. But what is he about to do? You know?
Yeah, that he came from God, he's returning to God. All of that's meant to contrast what's fixing to happen.
Yeah.
Because it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into the basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And, it's thinking about what was going through their minds when this is taking place. Because, and I think it may be on the next, I don't know if it's on the next slide or not, but of course they've been arguing about who's the greatest.
Yeah, that's coming up.
That's coming up. But here you've got the king, who they all see as the Messiah, the future king. He's going to be the ruler, and yet all of a sudden he gets up to.
So who typically washed feet in the ancient world?
Not just a servant, but the lowest of the servants. I mean, you stop and think about what it is you're doing. I mean, if you're a chief servant, that's not going to be your job. You're going to give that to somebody else.
Because that's not a pleasant job.
No. It's and again, when you stop and think about what it was like, and the fact that a lot of times not only was the streets, oftentimes also the sewers. But I mean, folks didn't have, they weren't walking around with, shoes and, laced
especially,
up
yeah,
and
yeah.
everything. I mean, they're at the best, they're in sandals. At the worst, they're not wearing any shoes. And
Yeah.
yet, and no matter how hard you try to avoid stepping in things, I mean, you're going to step in some things no matter how much you try to
Yeah.
avoid it. And
Yeah.
so you've got this, and you kind of wonder what it was like as the meal was going on. I mean, were they just used to the smell or what? Because I mean, I wouldn't have thought that would have made the meal a very pleasant time.
Well, I guess the old saying is, if all of you smell bad, you get. If you smell bad and I smell bad, we probably can't smell each other because we both smell so bad. But Jesus starts coming around, and Lee, that's got to have embarrassed the apostles.
Yeah.
To have the one they profess as King of Kings, Messiah, Lord, they had just come into Jerusalem 2 or 3 days earlier proclaiming him the Son of David, and here he is washing their feet. And then,
And even though it's had to have embarrassed them, not one of them said, "Let me take over."
absolutely. And you said it a while ago, because of what they've been arguing about.
Yeah. And again, it was a recurring theme throughout the Gospels.
And by the way, this is from Luke 22. This is the upper room.
Yeah.
A dispute also arose among them. It's almost as if they're coming into the room, the water basin is there, the towel is there, and Thaddeus looks at Simon and go, you going to wash feet? No, I'm not washing feet. Well, I'm not going to wash feet. And then Matthew comes in, and Matthew's looking over at Thomas going, are you going to wash feet? And Thomas says, I ain't washing feet. We can let Philip over there wash your feet. I'm not washing feet. I'm too important to wash feet. So they've already been arguing about this. I don't know if it's about this, washing feet, but it could well be.
I mean, it's kind of like one of those things, where, as a kid, last person there has to do the job.
Yeah.
As kids, you're running in wherever it is, you get the worst seat, or you get, if you're the last person, you get the worst job. So it's like, I need to get here. I just need to make sure I'm not number 12.
I remember as a kid, I'd go out to my grandmother's, and my grandmother and granddaddy lived on a farm, old-fashioned farm, full-fledged farm. They raised hogs, and anybody want to guess what they had right beside the back door in the kitchen? Anybody want to guess? They had a slop bucket. Do you know what a slop bucket is? Slop bucket is where you scraped off everything that was left over after a meal. You put it in the slop bucket. And then when the slop bucket got almost full, guess what grandmother did? Les, take that slop bucket up to the pigs. And so here I'm going, and when you're carrying a slop bucket, guess what you don't do?
Trip.
You don't trip, you don't walk fast, you are holding it out here, and you're trying to make sure you don't get any of this on you. And then you go to pull it in the trough where the pigs are, and you hope it doesn't splash back on you. Because if it does, you're sitting there going, oh, great. And so that's the apostles. We don't want to wash everybody's stinking, dirty feet. And so nobody does, because they're all in a contest. And then Jesus comes to Peter.
Yeah. So he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? I'm assuming that's a rhetorical question, because
I'm the same way. That's kind of a dumb question. He's washed everybody else's. Yeah.
And Jesus replied, you don't realize now what I'm doing. Later on, you'll get it. I mean, and they do get it later on. Mm-hmm. But right now, they're not getting it. And Peter, he's like, well, you're not going to wash. You're not washing my feet. Again, after arguing over who was the greatest, Peter likely couldn't bear the idea of Jesus the King taking on the role of a servant. And not just a servant, but the lowliest of servants. I mean, Peter, he's aghast. I mean, he's like, and maybe part of his mind's like, a king can't do this. he just can't do this. And he's probably looking around like, one of you guys need to get up and finish this off. But again, not only do none of the disciples volunteer to take over the role, none of them volunteer to wash Jesus' feet either.
You know, I don't know that I've ever even thought about that. And all the times I have looked at this, who washed? I guess Jesus washed his own.
Yeah.
And then I wondered, did he wash his own first, then wash theirs? But you know, Peter once again is this: you will never.
Yep.
By the way, let me give you a word of advice. Don't use never words. Never words always come back to haunt you. I mean, you know, before I was a parent, if I ever have kids, they'll never, don't do that. Let me tell you, PKs will embarrass you. I remember one time a lady called me up, Lee, and she said, Les, I just wanted to call you and let you know that the fire department's been over at my house. And I said, the fire department's been over your house? She said, yes. And I said, why? She said, well, my son made a crude bomb, took basically powder out of firecrackers and made a bomb, set it off in the backyard and caught the woods on fire. And I'm sitting there and I going, your son made a bomb? And said, yes. I'm like, wow. I said, I'm so sorry to hear this. I said, but why are you calling me? She said, guess where he got the instructions from? Oh, no. No. You know, and so I called my oldest son, and the internet had just come out. Internet had just come out. And I said, son, please tell me you didn't give so-and-so instructions for a bomb. Yes, sir. And I said, do you mind telling me where you got those from? He said, the library at Good Pasture. No, not Good Pasture. Son, if they find out you're downloading instructions for a bomb, you'll be kicked out. And if Bill Rule's listening, he was sorry. Okay. Yeah, I mean, sometimes when we say, oh, my kids would never, you know, we eat those words. And Peter had to eat these because what was Jesus' response?
Yeah. So he says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. You know, again, Jesus, he's got to teach them a lesson. He's got to get through to them. Of course, then Peter, again, his response is like, well, okay. Well, if he's
and he goes overboard the other way.
Yeah, let's go the whole 9 yards, you know. He, again, wants to dictate how Jesus is to wash him. And again, the Lord, you know, he uses this as a teaching moment. Again, not just for Peter, but for all the disciples. I mean, Peter oftentimes, I think, expresses things that the other disciples probably were thinking.
Absolutely.
You know, he's just the first one out of his mouth with it. But they're all probably thinking, well, yeah, that's a good idea. You know, go back and wash us all, you know, completely. But again, you know, Jesus says, look, there's no need for that, you know. But you do need to learn this lesson.
Yeah. And that was Jesus. Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. The whole body is clean. And you are clean. And then he hits them again.
Yeah. Though not every one of you.
Jesus, Lee, had a way of sliding things in that, again, probably, even though in this case did not, because he's going to come out and just get real blunt. This was meant to kind of stun them.
Yep.
You know, say something and you're like, whoa, wait, what did you just say?
Yeah. Did I hear that right? You know?
Yeah. And I don't know if Joan ever does that to you, but June is really good about saying something to me and then sliding something in right at the end that causes me to go, okay, you want to run that by me again? You know,
Just check and see if you're listening.
Just to see if I'm listening, because a lot of times I'm not, you know. And so Jesus slides this one in, but he doesn't leave it secret.
No, it moves on pretty quickly.
And this is, it's one thing that they're upset that Jesus just washed their feet. This one floors them, completely. And so this is going to lead to Judas's betrayal, but also Peter's denial. So go ahead as Jesus bluntly tells them.
Yeah, he says, I'm not referring to all of you. I know those who I have chosen. But this is to fulfill this passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me. Which again is, these are passages they're familiar with. I mean, they know, the Psalms are well known. They read them and they're thinking, okay, turn against me. Like, what's he mean now?
Yeah.
Who's turning against him?
Exactly. And then Jesus even gets blunter.
Yeah. He says, after he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified. And again, the emotions going through Jesus at this time as well. I mean, it's not just, I don't know, sometimes, I don't know if we feel like, well, Jesus knows everything that's, he knows all the things that are happening, and so this isn't really a big deal to him. But it is. I mean, even when you know something is coming, and we know in our own lives, if we know something's coming, we still get anxious about things like that,
Let me ask you a question. Can Joan read when you have had a change of spirit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Just, can read me like a book,
Yeah, that's what we say, isn't it? June will oftentimes look at me and go, are you okay? And sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am. Sometimes she'll look at me and she'll say, okay, your demeanor just changed. And I'm like, well, did you see what just happened to Tennessee in the ball game? Okay. Someone came in this morning and said, whatever you do, don't bring up the Tennessee game. And so, but June can read me like a book. I wonder, the text says Jesus was troubled in spirit. I wonder if the apostles could sense that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Did they pick up something in Jesus' voice? Was his voice trembling? Was it something in his face? What was it? And then here's what he said.
Yeah. Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. And the next verse, it's like they all start looking at each other, and they're looking, it's like, what? At a loss to know which of them he meant. And maybe even wondering, well, what betraying, what do you mean by betraying?
Exactly.
What is this involving? I don't think that I don't think they had any idea that betrayal meant impending death.
Right. Jesus had walked through crowds who were trying to stone him before. He had been able to escape every time. This time, no escape. And then they began to go around the room.
Yeah. Yeah. They were very sad. Understandably so. It's like, well, who's doing this? And they began to say to him, they're talking to Jesus. Well, Lord, is it me? Is it me? You don't mean me. Surely you don't mean me. And eventually, it does get to the one who he does mean.
That question, do you mean me? When I was a senior at Freed Hardeman, all of the Bible majors had to take a final, what was called seminar in Bible class, which involved writing a paper that we had to present to the entire class. After we had all turned our papers in, the Bible professor came in and he says, I need to say something to my class of Bible majors this year. All of us Bible majors in here. And he proceeds to say, I am so disappointed with you, because many of you have turned in papers that are plagiarized. You have plagiarized your papers. They're not legitimate. They're not your work. And plagiarizing is stealing. I can't believe y'all have done this. I've never had a class like this one to do that. And immediately we're all in there going, because I didn't even know what plagiarism was. I was like, how do you plagiarize? As one brother said, and he got so upset he walked out of class. And one brother spoke up and said, I wish somebody had started singing Just As I Am. I would have gone forward, you know. And the professor, before he left, said, I have written a letter to all of you who are guilty. You'll get it in the mail, and I want you to come in and see me because we're going to talk about this. And so every one of us went back to our mailboxes that day going, please, 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 don't have a letter from Dr. Woodson.
Even though I don't know what the word means.
I don't even know what the word means.
You know?
So I go back to my mailbox, I open my mailbox, I open it, and there's a letter from Dr. Woodson. And I'm like, uh-oh, what did I do? I pull it out, I open it up, I'm thinking I'm guilty. I mean, he sent me a letter. And I opened it up, and it said, Dear Leslie, congratulations on being chosen to the who's who of American colleges and universities. And I'm like, oh, man, you sent me a congratulations letter on the same day you're sending letters about plagiarism. You know, I didn't do it. I wasn't guilty of plagiarism. Wasn't sure what it was, but I wasn't guilty of it. But all of us were asking that question because we're all like, did I do it?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure. Even I wasn't sure. They're asking the same question. Like you said, and by the way, this is the way they ate back then. Not up here with the chairs. That's not first century. Down here, you would sit in a U-shaped table. You would eat lying down, leaning down. There would be cushions all around this. You didn't sit on the floor. Your feet were away from the table for a reason. Yeah. You leaned on an elbow and you would eat with the other hand. Okay? That's some of what, even though some of them are still sitting. They didn't sit. They reclined at the table. And so this is kind of a depiction. And by the way, if you'll notice up here, let me go back. If you'll notice up here, you've got Peter here across, motioning to John here, Jesus here, Judas here, and he's saying, who is it? Who's going to betray him? Okay? And you're like, well, surely the apostles would have heard that. No, this big table. Yeah. And so you could easily talk very quietly and nobody would hear. And so John is sitting right next to him. And so John leans into Jesus and says, who is it?
Yeah, because Peter says.
Yeah, Peter motions to him.
Ask him.
Who is it? And so he leans back. Notice, he's reclining. He leans back to Jesus and says, who are you talking about? And Jesus' answer is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I dipped it in the dish. By the way, if he's going to give it to someone when he dips it in the dish, it means what? Where's that person sitting?
Next to him.
Close to him. Close enough that he can reach them. He can't reach across to Peter. Peter's on the other side at the other table. Okay? And so that's why we know that sitting there was John. Jesus is here. John, and then Judas. And Jesus dips the bread in the dip and hands it to Judas. Okay? Which is a sign to John. I don't know that Peter knew, Peter's watching, but Peter can't hear what's going on. And so Peter's trying to figure this out. And boy, that's the one that bothers me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you do with that one, Lee? I mean, how does Satan enter him? I mean, do we experience that today, Satan entering us?
I mean, Satan, he enters the hearts of those who allow him to enter. We know Judas already
had agreed to betray.
He'd already agreed to it.
Yeah.
So it's not like this just came out of nowhere. He's already agreed to it. We also know that he had other issues.
Yeah.
He kept the purse strings. He kept the money. And he was upset. Well, one time, this could have been used.
Yeah,
when she, wasted, in his
poured
mind,
a whole year's worth of perfume on Jesus at once. Yeah,
and Judas like, what is going?
Yeah.
That could have been used, to help the poor. And that really wasn't what he was concerned about because he helped himself.
He pilfered from it.
From time to time.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're going to stop right here because our time is up. We're going to pick up next week because Judas is going to get up and leave. Jesus is going to say, okay, now all of you, not just Judas, all of you tonight are going to turn your back on me. Which prompts Peter again to say the never word.
Yeah.
Peter just couldn't get over himself. We're going to look how Jesus dealt with that gently and kindly. So how about leading us into prayer?
God, we do again thank you for this day. We thank you for the love you show to us. We're thankful for the fellowship that we're able to enjoy. We thank you for the scriptures that you provided to us as we continue to learn from them. And no matter how often we read your word, and we may read the same passages over and over again, and yet there are things that get brought to our attention that we've never thought of before, never recognized before. And we thank you for the revelations that continue to come to us in that way. We pray for those who are struggling in different ways right now, whether it's physically, whether it's emotionally, spiritually, those who've recently lost loved ones. We pray that you will be with each of them and their families. We think of the circumstances in various parts of the world, particularly in the Ukraine area and the Middle East. And we pray that more peace can come about, that those who desire destruction and who desire evil will be defeated in their purposes. Thank you again for loving us. Be with us each day. May we be the light to the world around us that you call us to be. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.